In the parables of Jesus, we have controversial, non-straightforward words. Parables go against the grain. They are stories that are upsetting because they fly in the face of accepted thought. Parables point us to deeper possibilities of truth and understanding. Jesus' parables were especially dangerous because they confronted conventional wisdom. This morning's gospel has two parts. Jesus first tells the parable to the crowd, and the scene changes, and in private, Jesus explains the parable. Taking it at face value, Jesus tells and immediately explains his story, so the mystery is stripped from the parable. But I have to wonder, would Jesus really have done this? Would the master storyteller tell us the one and only one way that his story should be understood, especially after just telling the story? I don't believe so. I envision great controversy concerning the retelling of these parables, influenced not simply by their understanding of what Jesus said, but also in light of what was happening in their own time. This is why so many biblical scholars see any explanation of the parable as belonging to the gospel writer rather than to Jesus. If I were leading a group of Bible study, I would spend some time discussing the parable before reading what the gospel writer believes the story to mean. But since the lectionary puts it all together, I'll do things in reverse. In the hearing the gospel writer's interpretation of the parable, it is good for us to remember two things. First, this telling comes out of an active Roman quelling of rebellion, including the putting to death of Christians and Jews and the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. Second, there was major conflict and break with those who followed Jesus and the temple leadership. Each blamed the other for the Romans' crackdown. It must have literally felt as if the early Christians were being choked by weeds from all sides. No wonder that they understood the parable in terms of us versus them. Hearing that God will one day right this wrong and reward the righteous were the words needed to live each day and to keep people from giving up all hope. Now let's turn back to the parable. We are told that good seed was sown. That's a reminder that creation was and is good. We are told that an enemy came and sowed weeds, a reminder that evil is real and in the world. Now, we assume that wheat and weeds represent two types of people: good people and bad people. This fits the early Christians' understanding as a persecuted people. However, if this is the only understanding, it means that this parable has no good news other than for one who is oppressed, and is useless to the majority of today's Christians, except perhaps as an important warning about abusing power. Is it possible for there to be more meaning in this parable? What if wheat and weeds, in another interpretation, were to be understood as two sides of everyone? The capacity to do great good and great evil. The ability to love and the ability to hate. The ability for peace and the ability for violence. If this is true, we have a choice. We can decide that the reapers will discern each individual as to whether or not they are more like wheat or more like weeds and will be dealt with accordingly. Or, in my opinion, a better understanding is that we can decide that in the life to come, when the kingdom of God becomes a reality, our evil tendencies, which are gathered first, will be bound and burned, leaving only our goodness to be gathered by God. Now, the critical question here, the critical question of every parable, is so what? What does this mean for the hearer? What are they called to do? If we are what has been sown, then it is our hope and responsibility to grow in goodness. We are called to embrace our good possibilities and to resist the things that harm each other and the world. Furthermore, we are called to primarily see the goodness found in others, instead of focusing on everyone's mistakes and failures. But what if that's not all we are called to in this story? Remember, one of the brilliant things about good parables is that just as there are multiple truths, there are multiple possibilities as for what should be done. Finding them often hinges on our ability to rethink who we are in the parable. In addition to being what is sown, I believe we are also called to be the ones caring for what has been sown. We are the workers in the garden, tending. It is not our responsibility to be ripping up weeds, evaluating people of their worth to God, deciding if they are good or evil. Instead, we are called to nurture the seedlings by tending to their needs and providing the environment for healthy growth. It only takes a short look at the world to see how critical one's environment is towards influencing decision-making and behavior. When people get treated like weeds, they see themselves as such. It's not hard to explain a great deal of their actions. But in this parable, God challenges us all to be invested in each other, treating all as good seed, as potential wheat. To see, understand, and act on our charge to help everyone grow in goodness and in love. Thanks be to God.